Hello, everybody. Thank you all for coming. Welcome to our first virtual workshop of the year titled Introduction to Blender, Modeling Materials and Simulations. My name is Talis Reks, and I'll be your instructor for today. I'm the virtual reality, augmented reality gaming technologist here at the Immersion Lab at MIT.nano. The Immersion Lab is right here on campus, right in the middle of the campus. So we do specialize in designing and developing immersive experiences aimed at research, art, architecture, data visualization, and much more. We utilize immersive technology such as virtual reality, augmented reality, motion tracking, and haptics, and a growing list of software tools to help drive our development forward. So today, I thought it would be fun to share a piece of software that we use quite a bit, nearly every day, that is powerful, free, and dynamic. And if you don't know, it's called Blender. So before we get into some of the slides and dive right into the software, I just wanted to let you guys know that this is an introductory class with no prerequisites required. If you are new to 3D development or have a bit of experience in it and just want to learn a few more tricks, or if you're just curious and want to understand how 3D models are developed from just a mesh model to a rendered image, this class is perfect for you. So now you are more than welcome to follow along, as I kind of mentioned previously, on your own computer. If you already have it downloaded. If you don't, you can go on blender.org now and you can download it. It should be a relatively fast download, hopefully, depending on your connection. But I'll be using Blender 3.0 for this course, but you are welcome to use any other version that you may have. Probably anything over 2.79, you might run into some layout or functionality differences if you're using anything older than that. So just wanted to start things off there. If you guys do have questions along the way about this course or modeling or just as we're doing things, feel free to enter those into chat. I will try to get to them as I go, but if I don't see them, I am going to leave some time at the end for discussions, comments, and answer any kind of lingering questions you guys may have. And so before we jump right into it, I guess it might be helpful to just discuss what Blender is, its capabilities if you don't already know it, and then just give you kind of an overview before we actually dive right into the software. So I believe you guys can see my screen. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide. So here we have Blender. So Blender is a free and open source platform that is dealing with 3D graphics. So it's a 3D graphical software. It was created by a Dutch animation studio in around 1994. So it's been around for quite a bit and it's developed a lot since then. It's been greatly accepted by 3D community, the 3D developer community, game designers, and just the common 3D designer like myself. The great thing about Blender is that there is so much you can do in it. It's kind of a whole big package. So I've listed a few here of some of the things that you can do, but you can do everything from animation, visual effects, art. You can do some VR, AR. We do motion capture in the lab and we utilize Blender for that. I'll be showing you guys a little bit of the fluid simulations, but you can do smoke, fire, and you don't need to work in 3D at all. You can do 2D animation, and so we're not going to get to that today, but just know that a lot of these functionalities are available. So hopefully, after taking this course, you will be able to create your own 3D assets to add to your environments. You will be able to hopefully simulate fluids, materialize 3D objects, render your images, so you can have a pretty nice capture there, and just ultimately understand the basics of Blender so that when you do jump in by yourself, you're more comfortable with being able to work on the technicality of it and then just focus more on the creativity, which is the end goal. So as I mentioned, we'll be discussing Blender, specifically modeling, textures, and simulations. And we're going to create a basic real-world object of a coffee cup. So although this is a relatively simple model, this course is designed to convey the basics of Blender and some of the functionality that is built within the software. So this workshop is intended to take a little bit less than 2 hours and aimed at beginners to help you get more comfortable with the interface. So although we will cover a lot, the aim is to get you comfortable enough to starting building your own custom digital assets, or to even understand how they're created. So I have designed this course so that you guys can all follow along. However, it is not required. And we will leave a few minutes between each section so you can experiment and modify and kind of customize it to your liking. I will be going through kind of the basic ways and the fundamental ways of doing things, but feel free to experiment as you go. Don't be afraid to break things. You don't need your image to look exactly like mine. I really want to stress that. There are a lot of opportunities where you can customize it through yourself. So just let that be known. So we will start with just kind of talking about the viewport, navigation, and the user interface of the application. This will be helpful for you to kind of navigate around. You'll probably need to do that before you start handling an object. And then understanding what panels are what and how to switch things so you can really maximize the performance and the efficiency of you utilizing the software. And then we'll jump right into it. So we'll go right into the modeling, and we will talk about a little bit about the hard surface modeling, which we'll be doing here. A lot of these tips that I'll be showing you, just keep in mind that you can use these principles for other objects. So even if you're in this course, you don't need to be making a cup even. A lot of these principles can be used for other assets. So again, just feel free to experiment. This is just a way of giving you guys the information on how to manipulate models so you can do it yourself. We'll talk a bit about the hard surface modeling. Like I mentioned, essentially it's a modeling technique that uses smooth static surfaces. This is typically used for cars, robots, machines, anything really non-organic. And this is in contrast to sculpting or considered soft surface modeling, which we won't be doing today, but there's always opportunities in the future where we can think about adding on to this workshop for a few more complex features. So then we'll talk about scaling and extruding faces, pretty much the standard, what you need to do to manipulate an object, work with vertices, edges, and faces. And then we will talk about object modifiers, which will be a big help for you guys. These modifiers will allow you to change your object non-destructively, so you can be a little bit more dynamic and flexible when you're working with objects. If you mess up, you're not completely screwing up your model. So you have kind of these safety nets. Once we go through that, we will then go to materials, and we'll talk a little bit about materials and textures. Today, we'll just be going through adding a new material and looking further into the material node editor, which will allow you to place materials on an object and add texture to it. We will add some procedural textures where we can adjust the size, scale, and the look of the texture, so we won't actually be using real images. There are ways of using image textures, so you can grab one from the internet and overlay that on, let's say, a cup or a basketball or whatever, but we won't be doing that today. We're going to be doing procedural textures, so using nodes, and you can experiment a lot more. You can add some math, you can be dynamic. So that's kind of the reason why I'm bringing this into it. And so once we do that, we will then, at this stage, you'll be able to kind of, if you're following along, this is a good opportunity for you to experiment. We will talk a little bit about the materials and how we can make them look more metal or decrease the roughness of an object so it's a little bit more shiny. So I'll show you guys how to do that. And again, this will be probably the most customizable part of the tutorial. So you can go in any direction with this. So definitely keep that in mind. Once we kind of go through that, we will then talk about simulations. This is super fun to do, and we will talk about the different types of simulations that are available in Blender. But for our purposes today, we'll be using a liquid or fluid simulation. We're going to simulate a fluid, any fluid that you want. For what I use was coffee, to flow into the cup, and the cup having more of a collision. So it's not passing through the cup, it's actually going right in and it's filling it up. So that will be fun. And this might be the most computationally heavy part in the course. So it might take a little bit to render, or depending on your hardware you might be using. So depending on that, you might want to remain low on the resolution scale. And I will definitely prime you guys to let you know when we're going to do that, just so we don't overburden your computer and send out millions of particles or that you might not necessarily need. And so once we finally have a good image there, we will then finally take a frame and we will add a material to the liquid and color it to match the color of your desire. And then we will finalize there and we will start rendering. We will talk a little bit about rendering and some of the camera tricks that you can take place to kind of create a beautiful render. You are more than welcome to use Eevee render engine or cycles. If you don't know what that means, Blender has two different render engines, one Eevee and one cycles. We will talk a little bit about the differences between the two a little bit later on in this course, but we won't dive too far deep in there. That can be definitely room for another course that just goes a little bit outside the scope of this introductory course. But just know you can use either one for following along. All right. And so, and again, like I mentioned, at the end of the course, we will leave around 10 to 15 minutes for questions, comments, or concerns, and hopefully leave you with the skill sets to create your own 3D assets. So with that said, let me just show you. So this is the modeling. So we'll pretty much start with this blocking. So typically you block out a model before you start adding more detail to it. We will then finally do the materials, like I mentioned, and then the simulation. So these are just some snapshots, but you guys will see this firsthand while we actually go through it together. So if you are following along, probably now is a good time to launch Blender and open the application. I will give you guys a couple minutes to do so, and I will open it on my end. And we'll start looking at the interface and ways of navigating the 3D space. So I will give everybody just a minute to do that. And in the meantime, feel free to get ready to blend. All right. So hopefully everybody has the application open. What you will see is an interface like this. You might get a splash screen in the beginning where it kind of allows you to choose the layout. Feel free to just choose general or click outside of the splash screen, and you will be guided to just the basic screen setup. And so just quickly, just to show you what is involved, this is your 3D space. So this is where you will be working with all of your 3D objects, and it will allow you to navigate, rotate, and move around certain objects. This is most likely where you will be seeing your rendering and working with your 3D models. Now, to navigate, which is pretty important, there's a few things to keep in mind. So you can select objects with left click pretty easily. You can select them either in the 3D viewer, like so, or you can actually click them in the hierarchy. And so all of the objects that are in your 3D viewer will show up in the hierarchy here. And as your project grows, more objects will be added to the hierarchy. And so you will be able to use these collections to more or less organize your project in a neat fashion. Strongly recommend you getting acclimated to this because you will run into situations where you have a ton of objects in your scene and you just don't know where they are or where they lie. So it's always a good habit to name your objects accordingly. So once we start diving into the cup, we will name it cup, and you can just do that by double clicking into that. So here's your 3D viewer, and here is your hierarchy. And then we also have our properties panel here. This property panels is where we'll be doing a lot of the work by adding materials, adding object modifiers, and we won't go through every single one today, but things to keep in mind. So for the render engine that I mentioned, you would be able to change the render properties here. So you can do Eevee or cycles. Again, they're just two different render engines, but it won't really matter for this course. You have your output properties here, and this will be able to change the resolution of your render and all this stuff. And so we will get to this probably a little bit later in the course when we're finally rendering our final image. So just keep that in mind. But things that we will need for the first modeling aspect of things are this object modifier panel. And then once we get to the materials, we'll be going into the materials property. And after that, we will then start working with the physics property. So those are kind of the three panels that we'll be using. So we have the modifier for the modeling, we have the material properties for the materials, and we have the physics property for the fluid. And we will take you step by step for each one. So don't worry about that. So to navigate, as you can see, I'm rotating, I'm zooming, and I'm translating. So to do this is, depending on the type of mouse that you have, you can middle click and you can just rotate around an object. And as you can see, you actually have X and Y coordinates to help you kind of orientate yourself. And you also have it up here in this top panel here. You do have a Z. It's just not showing here. But if I grab this object by just clicking it and then pressing G, I can actually move it in any direction. But if I wanted to move it in, like, let's say an X or Y, I can just press on my keyboard X, and that will move it on the X coordinate, or Y, move it on the Y, or if I press G and then Z, I'm going to be moving it on the Z coordinate. I will be using a few hotkeys during this tutorial, but I will make sure that I vocalize those hotkeys as I'm using them. I know some applications might use different hotkeys, so I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. So that is to spin around. To actually go like this and translate your camera or your view, you're actually gonna click Shift and then middle click. And this will allow you to kind of go underneath, go up on top. So this will give you some flexibility. And then zooming is as easy as the scroll bar or scrolling on your mouse. And this will bring you right to the object. All right. So while you have those in place, feel free to move around. It's best to do it yourself. If you are, I did want to mention, a lot of users who do jump into Blender, they do have a Wacom stylus or something alike. You don't need that for this course. So we are going to just be using a mouse and our keyboard for this. If you do have a Wacom tablet, put that on hold until the sculpting workshop, if that comes into play. All right, so a little bit more on the interface here. You have your standard file, edit, render, window, and help. So, these are all pretty standard in terms of opening blend files, importing FBX or OBJ files, which are just object file formats that Blender is able to read. You can import as well. So if you have objects already on your local device, you can always import FBX files or any one of these files for that matter into your project directly. Edit. The edit, I just want to show you one thing. Depending on if you're coming from, let's say, like Maya or other 3D developing platforms, if you actually go into preferences, you can look at your system here, or navigation rather, and you can actually change this. So with the navigation that we were going through, if you wanted to change things, you're more than welcome to kind of edit this. A lot of these can match, let's say Maya or ZBrush if you used that before. So just take a look into this. If your key map, if you want it to be, right click, select button, or left, if you're just more familiar with that, with either using Maya or ZBrush or 3ds Max, more than welcome to change that. But I am going to stick it with the default, again, just because we're on this, just so we're on the same page. But just know that that's an option for later down the road, depending on your comfort level. Next, before we even go any further, we do have a help here. And so if you have any questions after the course about a specific topic, we have our manual here, and manual and tutorials and support. Use these. These will help you a lot. They're documentation that describes every single piece of the software. So if you just search, a specific term, you can always find that in the manual and read up on it. And more or less, there will be tutorials online that will essentially describe what you're looking for. So, Blender is heavily used within the community. So there's always someone creating tutorials, giving tips and tricks. So use the community as your benefit. That's the one thing in Blender that I think is super valuable. And then, so to continue on, we have these panels here, and these panels are essentially just changing your user interface to match the function that you would be, or the procedure that you would be looking to do. So we have our general layout here. If you click modeling, you would essentially go into the modeling pane, which doesn't really do much other than put the object in edit mode. And I will talk a little bit about that in a second. You can do sculpting, which would give you more of your sculpting interface and allow you to change your brush sizes. So you can brush on this. You can do UV editing. We will talk a little bit about UV editing today, but we're not going to UV unwrap our model. We'll talk a little bit about this later, but we are just going to be adding procedural textures to it. But if you are doing, let's say, an image texture, more or less you would want to unwrap your model just so that you have a clear distribution of the image onto your 3D mesh. Typically texture, it's nothing more than, let's say, a two-dimensional matrix of pixels. And to apply a texture correctly to a 3D object, you must tell it how to map those pixels from a 2D using X and Y to a 3D object that uses X, Y, and Z. And doing that conversion is called UV mapping. So given the time and what we were trying to cover in this class, we will revisit this in future workshops. So for now, we will only use the procedural textures to style and design and allow that to happen. But just know materials They differ from textures in that materials are much more than textures, as they include kind of the glossiness, the roughness, sometimes bump maps of the object. So we'll be seeing a few examples later on where we can add a little bit of some of that metallicness or some of that bump rigidness. But you'll see some examples in a second. Texture paint, this will allow you to actually draw on your object. Shading, we will talk about the shading here where we do, this is the shader editor nodes right here. And so we'll talk a little bit about this. Animation, which we won't get to today, unfortunately, but this is a lot of fun, being able to animate objects moving within 3D space over time. And then your rendering tab, which you can do some post-production. You can do some composition here. And then geometry nodes is relatively new. I believe this was added 2.9, 3.0 around. And this will allow you to kind of create dynamic objects and allowing nodes to facilitate how objects are placed. This I would be very interested in discussing in a later workshop because I think this has some really cool potential. And then scripting. So this we do quite a bit in the lab. We use a lot of our motion capture data and push this into Blender and allow some of our scripts to do some of the computationally heavy lifting part, and then it can spit out some of the either traces or trails or some of the values that we're looking for. So Blender is built in Python. So they do have a Python API that you can work with. You can import your own libraries. So if you are interested in this topic, definitely let me know. And we can think of different ways on how we can create a little activity using some Python scripting in Blender, which could be pretty cool. So that is just it in a nutshell. However, I do want to mention that in your layout tab, any panel can become anything. And I know that sounds a little daunting, but on this top left here, you always have this little indicator of what that panel actually is. And so if you click it, you see that we are in a 3D viewer. But let's say I wanted to do a shader editor. I can actually turn this whole screen into a shader editor. Okay. And now that's helpful because now I don't need to go back and forth, and I can almost customize my interface to my liking. But now I can't see my 3D viewer, which is a little sad because I wanted to see my cube. So if I go back to the 3D viewport, here is my main interface. This is a really nice trick that I use all the time. If you go all the way to the right or the corners of the panels, you can actually click and then drag. And what that will do is duplicate the panel that you are in. So now I have two windows that I can work with. I have an additional window of a 3D viewport. So I can now keep this in my 3D viewport, but now I can choose this and go into my shader editor. So this is a way of being able to maximize your interface and customize it depending on what piece you're working for. To be honest, I don't typically go into here because as I'm going, I'm essentially adding panels like this for whatever piece of the pipeline I'm working on. So if I was, say, doing UV unwrapping, I would have this here. I would be doing my UV maps here, be working with my materials, and I still have access to my property panels and my hierarchy. And so you might get in an instance where now, oh, I'm trying to get rid of this, I'm trying to get rid of this, and now you just have way too many windows. I've been there before. What you can do is take it and then just reverse it. So you're clicking the corner and you're dragging it into the pane that you want to replace. So, and then you let go, and now that covered it up. Same thing here. I go up and I cover it up. Say I want one more, go around, cover it up. So this is just one way of navigating through your panels. And just remember, every panel can be whatever you want. If I wanted this to be the outliner, now I have my hierarchy here, and I can bring this to my preferences tab, right? And so this will be all customizable. This is up to you, whatever you think is necessary or what you need at the time. Don't be afraid to change them. You're more than welcome to do so. There's no right way to do that. And that goes with quite a bit of what we're going to be doing today. I will be showing just how I will be kind of manipulating objects, but if you have your own style, if you have your own techniques, have at it. You know, the reason why Blender is so widely used is because it does fit for a lot of people's different techniques and styles. So you know, just I can't stress enough, experiment and be creative. So with that said, hopefully you guys are a little bit more comfortable with the interface aspect of things. Now I'll kind of jump into a little bit more of the modeling. So we can try to manipulate this object here. Now, typically what you see is as soon as someone opens up a Blender file, they press A, they select all, they press X to delete. A lot of people do that. I personally, there's a lot of hate with the box here. People don't like the cube. I personally like the cube, so we will work with it for now. So here is your cube. Now, this mesh is made up of edges, vertices, and faces. And so you have the object in object mode here. To edit the object, you can either press Tab to go into edit mode, or you can choose this drop down and click edit mode. Now that you have the cube in edit mode, you can then manipulate it. You can either manipulate the vertices, the edges, or the faces. Okay. So if I do vertices, for example, I'm going to click on one of the vertices on my cube. Now, if you recall how I grabbed the cube to translate it in the Z direction, the short key is G. So if I press G on just one vertice, I'm now changing one vertice on the cube. Okay, if I wanted to just move it in the Y direction, let me go back. And to go back, it's Control Z, by the way. If I wanted to grab it and just move this one vertice in the Y direction, I can just press G and then Y. And now I have control over this vertice in just the Y direction. You can do the same thing with edges. So G, let's do Z. Let's bring this into the Z direction. So now I'm just bringing that down. Now let's do faces. So I can grab this face. I can do G, X, and bring that here. So now we don't have much of a cube anymore. But essentially, you're just moving the vertices and the faces. Now, that's one way of doing it. You can also take a face and you can press S to scale. Now you can scale it really small. Take this, scale it big. Now we have a pyramidish. Now, a cool thing to know about this is if I press S, I'm manually adjusting it. If you wanted to be more fine-tuned or surgical or looking at kind of a CAD model and you want values are important, you press like 1 or 2. So you scale it 2 times, you can scale it 0.5, half of that, So there is that option. Now, if you press N, you're actually going to get some information here. You're going to get some transform information. So if I go back to object mode, I see my location of the cube based on the origin. So keep that in mind. The origin is the center of the cube. You have your rotation here, and you have your scale. And so you can edit it through here as well. Or you can edit manually based on the hotkeys and kind of the vertices and edges and faces for what I was describing. So before I get into that, let's just finish up with this top panel here, because sometimes this will be important a little bit later on. So we have wireframe, which we can see just the wireframe of the object. So this is pretty much just looking at all of the edges that are part of your mesh. And you can still edit it like this view. So now I'm in wireframe view. And this right here that I just turned off, this is mirror mode, or X-ray mode rather. You can always click into it. And what that will allow you to do is, even if I'm in solid view, you can do X-ray and you can see right through it. This can be sometimes helpful if you're trying to figure out, what are the other side, if it's digging in, or, just being able to be a little bit more transparent with your object. So I'm going to turn that off. So you have wireframe. You have your object. Go back to object mode. And then you have your materials. So this is your viewport shading. So as of right now, we don't have a material on it. And we can check by going to the materials property, and there's nothing there. So we'll get to that in a second. And then we have our viewport shading render view. So if I press render, if I take a snapshot and render this, this is what it would look like. So not that appealing, but we will make this very pretty and nice. So yeah, so hopefully that was helpful describing a little bit about the interface. And again, you can do this mirror mode. It's super helpful when you're trying to work through objects. And you also do have these panels here. These you end up getting a gizmo where you can actually just manually do it without having to do hotkeys. So all of the hotkeys is you will be able to see what shortcut it is by just hovering over the function that you're looking at. And what's really helpful is you will also get a description of what it does. And so for scale resize. So if you're ever lost or you don't know what something does, like let's say I'm back into my clicker, you can choose W to do that. If I go to object and I don't know what parent does, parent the object, set the object's parent. So sometimes the little description that will pop up will help you and guide you to define what to do next. So, all right, so I think we've exhausted the cube for now. As fun and ambitious as this was, it was fun. So what we're going to do is we're going to delete it. So to delete an object, we're going to press X and delete. And that's it. So now we have nothing in our scene. We want to make sure that we have nothing in our scene by looking at our hierarchy, and it's closed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this. I'm going to say cut, because why not? And I'm going to add an object here. Now, when working with objects, it's pretty important to work with references, especially when you're 3D modeling or blocking out objects. You can always use references online to help you guide your design. I would strongly recommend that. For the coffee cup, I did pick something very simple, hopefully familiar to everybody. So references are not required. However, I will be adding a link to I guess a reference application that you can just drag and drop images in, and it makes it super seamless. It's called PureRef, and I will include that at the end of the session, where it's a free download. It just gives you a basic panel, and you can kind of distribute all your references accordingly, depending on lighting, size, and all that stuff. But for now, we're not going to worry too much about references. Hopefully you guys know essentially what a mug looks like. If you're making a mug, again, you don't need to be making a mug. But so for this, I am going to add a circle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a circle so we can extrude faces. Now, extrusion allows you to kind of expand faces. So actually, let me bring back our lovable cube real quick. So here's our cube. Now we can, like we said, we can, edit these, but let's say I wanted to expand this. So I could do this, right? But I'm not adding geometry. I'm not adding edges to the mesh. To do so, you can press E to extrude. So I'm actually holding the face. So I have the face selected, and I press E, and I'm moving it up. Okay. And so that allows me to essentially add a whole other cube attached to my cube, which is pretty nice. And you can do this in any direction. So you can extrude this way. Okay, based on what we know, we can rotate. That's not equal. Something that I did miss. If you are working with a keypad, you might be able to do this on a laptop as well. You can, right now we're looking at the object in a perspective mode. We also have the option of looking at it in an orthographic mode. Orthographic really takes away a lot of the depth. It essentially looks at your object on essentially one plane, if you will. And to show you that, I'm just going to press 5 on my keypad, and now I'm in orthographic. So it looks a little odd sometimes between perspective and orthographic. But what's really helpful is if you're looking it on straight on and you want to be very precise with your orientations, orthographic might be a better solution. And so the number pad I use a lot to navigate around and to be a little bit more, I guess, efficient with my view of the object. So if I press 1 on the keypad, I'm looking directly in front of it on the Y and the negative Y axis. So you can experiment with this. So if I press 3, I'm looking at it on the side view. If I press 7, I'm looking at it on the top. And I press 9, I'm looking at it on the bottom. And these are all in orthographic view, because if I wanted to, let's say, press 3, go into my X-ray mode, and I wanted to move this just here, it might be hard doing that in perspective because I don't know where that line draws. And if I pull it, 2 units forward, or 3 units forward rather, I don't know if I'm in line. So if I go to orthographic mode and I press edit, and now I'm targeting the face, right? I can press G and move it directly where I want it to be. And so if you're being more cautious of where you put things or where you lie things, this is a super helpful tip. So you can get familiar with navigating here. If you press 4 and 5, it just rotates. So it's a little bit, and I believe 8 and 9 do, yeah, 8 and 2 do the same thing. If you are working on a laptop, I believe maybe Control 1, 2, 3, 4, but I don't typically work on it. So definitely leave it in the comments if you guys find that out. So great. So extrusion is important. We're going to be extruding, and you'll see that in an example in a second. So I'm going to turn X-ray off. Another cool thing is you can delete faces real quick. So if I wanted to get rid of this face and forward, I can press X, and I can choose what it's going to delete. Again, X is mostly delete for everything. So just keep that in mind. So if I press X, I can then delete just a face. So now I'm like, I have a hollow, I guess, L. And if you wanted to fill it, you can go to edge mode, and you can select all of these, right? The bounding box. And how do I fill it? Fill starts with an F. All right, so that worked, great. So easy enough. If you didn't want to select all of them, you could press Alt and then click the edge loop. This is called an edge loop because it's looping around the model. And then you can press F. I will be adding an edge loop. So now that we're talking about edge loops, here's an edge loop here. Say I wanted an edge loop right in the middle. Edge loops are pretty common, and you'll see why as we create the cup. So if I press Control R, and you have to be in edit mode for this, you can place an edge loop here. So see how it's kind of a different perspective. Control R, it's a different, so it's going around the whole object. Now I can go ahead and click that, and then you can just decide where you want to place it based on the model. If you just right click, it will put it directly in the center. Something that's cool tip, go back, Control Z, Control R. So now I have an edge loop. If I scroll my mouse or my wheel, I can then add 2 edge loops, or 3, or 4, or 5, or however many edge loops we want. So if you wanted to add more geometry, which you will see why we will want to in very shortly, this is one way to do it. All right, so I think we have the basics of creating a cup in terms of extruding, deleting, and all that. So I want to move a little bit further, and now we can actually start developing the cup or creating the cup. So I'm going to add a circle, as I mentioned before. I can either go to this add, and I have all of these options I can add. I can add a plane, a cube, a circle, a UV sphere, a torus, a monkey. Cool, nice. This is Suzanne, by the way, very famous monkey of Blender. You may have seen him before. So I'm going to delete it. You can select that, or you can do Shift A. Shift A will bring out that same panel. And as I mentioned, we're going to do a circle. So let's go ahead and create a circle. And here we are. So we are looking directly at a circle. We can zoom in. If we press edit, we can see all of the different edges, and we can see all the points. Okay, so I think this is 32 or 64 something in vertices for it. It doesn't matter, you can change the amount. You actually can't change the amount of vertices here. You'll need to delete it and then add a circle. And then see in this bottom left, this add circle, this is where you can change. So we're at 32 vertices. We can make it more or less. I would recommend keeping it at 32 for now. But just know that once you click outside of this, that will go away. And now you click it, you can't get that back. So you can always add geometry after you add the circle, but keep in mind that you can't get that feature back. So let's start designing the cup. What does a cup look like? So we have our base, and it's a very simple design. Let's select the edge. So we have that selected in our edit mode. So you can either click and do control and go around, or you can hold alt and click. So now you have all of the vertices and all of the edges selected. I'm then going to press 3 to look at it directly in the X axis. And I'm going to press E to extrude. So if I press E and move up and press Z, I'm now moving it in the Z direction. And I can place that here. Okay, so now we have kind of like a cylinder. Still doesn't look like a cup all that much. That's okay, we're getting there. So if I'm going to edit, we don't have too much geometry here. And that might be an issue a little bit later on, but let's just block out the mesh first. We just want to block out our cup. What does it look like? We're not worrying about materials. We're not worrying about the simulation yet. We're just strictly worrying about blocking out a cup. So I have this bottom here. Now I can go ahead here and press F to fill. All right, now it actually looks a little bit more like a cup. Great. And I don't think cups are really always, parallel like this and even. So I'm going to scale this up a little bit. And I'm just going to do that manually. And so now we have a little bit of a guide here. Okay. And so what I want to do is I don't want these to be too far apart. You do want to add geometry to your mesh. So I'm going to add an edge loop. And so I'm going to press Control R. And I'm just going to add one in the middle. Okay. It's not bad. But I still don't know if I want that. Because what we're going to do is we're going to be adding object modifiers. And you will see why edge loops are important in a second. So I'm actually going to get rid of that for now. And I want to show you an example of what an object modifier does. So if I go to object modifier, I can see all of these different modifications. Please explore. There's so much you can do. Things like, mirroring. So you can work on one object and you can mirror what you're doing on the right side, on the left side. Or Boolean. You have one object intersecting the other, and then you choose which object you want to bool, and then it will pretty much make an intersection point, or it would get rid of some geometry that's overlapping. Or even array. If I wanted a bunch of these, you can have an array modifier that expands 16, so you don't need to duplicate. So modifiers are non-destructive, which means if I make, 10, I'm not manipulating the mesh at all, so I can just exit out and I still have my original design. Now this is pretty important when we get to the two that we'll be using, solidify and subdivision surface. Solidify will do exactly it. It is making your object a little bit more solid. It's adding depth to your object. Subdivision surface is essentially adding geometry and smoothing things out a little bit. And so if I am looking at this and I click all of it and I press right click, I have this version subdivide, this option subdivide. So if I click that, I now have subdivided each face. Now, this isn't what I want to do. You guys don't need to follow along here, but just know that that's kind of what the operation is doing, but non-destructively. Okay, so I can't do much. I have to go back. Whereas if I just added a subdivision modifier, I can then toggle that on and off, which we'll do in a second. Okay, so let's get to the cup. So we have the cup here. Let's add a solidify. All right, so we're now solidifying. So you see a little bit of depth here. We can increase that. So each operator has a set of operations here. We are going to increase the thickness. There you go. So now we have a relatively thick edge. I think that's good for now. I'm gonna keep it at 0.09. I think that's a good one. And because it's non-destructive, I can turn this off and on, which is really, really nice. I can also look at the vertices. If I turn this on, right, you can still see this, but I'm not seeing it on the other side. Now, with this, we are actually going to solidify this, and we will apply this modifier because we do want to manipulate the mesh moving forward. We just wanted to solidify it so we can add some depth around the edge. And so what we can do here is apply it by going down here and pressing this arrow and then hitting apply. All right, so now we can edit this side because now it's taking into account, okay, you have applied the geometry modification. We are now essentially adding that to the mesh and giving you the vertices in the proper ways of being able to manipulate it. So I'm happy here. We have this cup, and so what we want to do now is let's add a handle. Maybe a handle would be a good thing. We have just a basic cup, but if you remember in the beginning, we had a handle. And the handle might not be intuitive, so I think this is a good thing to go towards. So if I press edit, okay, and I choose some of these, I can then extrude out, right, like we talked about. So I can extrude a lot of these sides. But before I do that, I just want to make sure that we have enough geometry for the subdivision modifier to make out our mug. And the reason why I'm saying that is because we don't have many edge loops. And edge loops will be able to form kind of that foundation or those ridges. So we want enough geometry where a lot of our details and edges are being seen. So if I click, if I go into object mode and do subdivision modifier, it's going to look a little funky. But that's okay. It's because we don't have edge loops. Now, if I actually go into edit mode and then do Control R and add an edge loop, you see how the geometry is changing a little bit? It's adding a little bit more changes here. So I'm just adding one edge loop on the other. Okay. And so we have this issue here where we're seeing kind of these these polygons, and it is because we don't have enough geometry. Even if I increase the level of subdivisions by 1, it smooths things out a little bit, but down here we're not getting, I guess, the geometry that we're looking for. It's being a little bit messy, if you will. And so a way to fix this is by clicking the face, and I'm actually going to get rid of this. So I can delete the face, delete the face. And so we could do this before we actually do the solidifier, but we're just going to do it now for the sake of time. I'm just going to press E and then scale in, and then E again, and then E again. And then I press F at the end. And now that gives me kind of a flat surface here. And I will do this here as well. So now we got rid of that issue. And it's because we added more polygons and more geometry to the mesh to allow the solidifier to smooth over. And in practice, you probably would want to make that fix before we do the solidify, but just for the purpose of explanation and to show you that those triangles were being stretched out, that is the reason why. Okay. To keep in mind, depending on your hardware, you want to be very careful with subdividing it too much. If you subdivide this to 10, don't do it. We might lose you on Zoom. So keep this to a relatively small number. I would say, 3 max maybe. But as you can see, we're getting a much cleaner cut. Render mode, this won't show until it's actually rendered. So I can turn this to 4, but I can work in a level of 3. Now this is super powerful because now I can work, even in a division of 2, and then my final product, my final render will be 4. So it's really cool to do that. So now that that's done, let's go ahead and create the handle because I am looking at the time. So we are going to press Control R and add an edge loop, let's say around here. Press Control R, add an edge loop here, wherever you want the handle to extrude out. And now we have essentially a pretty good block. And I can turn this down even if I still wanted to work in my block mode, which might be helpful here. And then I want to look directly in the whatever orientation you want. For me, I'm looking directly at the Y. So I take 2 of these faces. I press 3 so I get a side view. If I press Control 3, I look at the other side. And then I'm going to press E to extrude. And I'm going to extrude this on the Y-axis since that's the direction of where it's being pulled. Okay. I can press R to rotate, maybe straighten it a little bit. And then G and then Y to push it out a little bit. So now I have something that looks like this. We are getting closer to a cut. I'm liking this. So now if we click this and this, these 2 sides here, I'm going to talk about one more hotkey, which is I, and that's the inset. So you're actually pushing, I guess, the edges closer together. You're scaling it down, or you could scale it up, I believe. But yeah, so we're going to scale it down. And so now we have something like this. Now there are a few ways of being able to do this. The way I found was the easiest was to hold on to these 2 faces that you have selected, and you go to Edge, and you have this bridge edge loops. Create a bridge of faces between 2 or more selected edge loops. Sounds like something I want, so I'm going to go ahead and click it, and look at that. That's nice. So now I have faces that are actually connecting those bridge loops. So we are carrying on. So now if I look back at my level of view, it's still blocky. So let me go to 2. All right. So now we have something a little bit more like a handle. I'm going to go into 3. My computer looks like it can handle it. And we still have kind of these, you can see the polygon still. So if I click my object and right click, I have a shade flat or shade smooth. Let's smooth it. Now we're in business. All right. So I think that's as far as I want to get to sculpting or sorry, modeling the cup. I think we're in a good position to move forward to talk about materials. If you're not at this place yet, that's totally okay. If you just have a cylinder and solidified it, that's fine. If you have another object, totally fine too. But experiment with this, add another edge loop here, right? So now I'm making the handle a little bit wider. I can scale this in the X direction. You can bridge this down. So there's so much you can do now that you have it already kind of modeled. You can add another edge loop here. So, you know, bring this up, bring this down, make it a little bit tighter. So just experiment with this. This is your creativity. So now we have this. I'm pretty happy with it. So let's start, I guess, adding some materials, some textures to it. So if I go into material mode, I'm in nothing. I have nothing here. If I go into my material properties, I'm going to add a new material. So I'm going to go ahead and hit new. All right, nothing changed. Cool. But it did change. We added a material to our object, which is great. And I'm going to name this, because it's always good to name things, cup. Let's name it cup. Cool. You know what? I'm going to name it red cup, because I will color it red cup. So now I can do it here, right? I have this principled BSDF shader, and I'm able to change the color here, which is pretty cool. But I want to do a little bit more. So a good interface to do this in is the shader editor. So I can expand, but I'm actually going to recollapse and bring it down here. And I'm going to choose my editor type, and I'm going to go to shader editor. So this looks the same as this, and it's because it is. It's the same exact nodes as here, but when you have an interface like this, you can then kind of expand on this. Okay, so before we do that though, this is your base color. And you have so many options here. We're not going to go through every single one, but you know, keep in mind that you can do like metallicness, and that will change the metallic features of your cup. What I've found helpful is to really change the roughness. So if you're high metallic, low roughness, you really have a metalled object here. If you're low metallic, low roughness, you have more of a rubbery kind of feel. If you're high metallic, high roughness, you kind of have a matte texture. So depending on what you're looking for, these are some options to change as you go. So I'm just gonna make it like kind of a little metalish because that was kind of in the tutorial or the reference image. So great. So I'm like happy with this. I have a red cup, and I can change it to not red, but then I would have to change my name. So I'm going to keep it red cup here. Okay. Now let's say I wanted the bottom, you know, the bottom to be blue. It only has one material on it. So how do I add another material? You wouldn't do this, okay? Probably could somehow, but what we're gonna do is just press this add material slot. So what we're doing is we're saying, okay, this cup is then gonna have 2 materials. It's gonna have a red cup or a red material, call this red matte, and then I'm going to add a new one and name this blue mat. And, you know, change the names as you go. It'll be a common practice for you. You can always preview what it will look like on just like a globe. So if I go to blue, that makes sense. You know, that's kind of the blue color. And it's right here too. So it found it in my node editor. If you just wanted to look at the nodes, you can always select your red mat here, your blue mat here, or if you just select it. So everything is all integrated together. But now I don't see any blue, and that's because I didn't assign anything yet. So if I select the whole thing and I go to blue and I assign it, now we have a blue cup, a blue matted cup. Let me turn up the metallic, turn down the roughness. Cool, so now we have like a pretty blue cup. But I wanted a red cup with a blue bottom. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to assign it, and then I'm going to grab by selecting these edge loops here. So you can either select it with that Alt, and then Shift, and then Alt, Shift, Alt, Shift, Alt. There you go. And then I'm going to click on my blue mat and then assign it a material. So now I have kind of a blue bottom. I don't like that circle, so I'm actually going to add that there. Cool. So now I have a blue one. Let me change this. So you can click this, and I kind of want this red ring around. I think that would be kind of cool. So I'm going to click this one, go around, hold down Shift, hopefully. Or Control rather, sorry, Control. And I'm going to grab all of these, and then I'm going to make this blue too. So I'm going to assign that blue. And see, it is causing these deformations here, and that is because of the edge loop. So when in doubt, edge loop it up. I'm gonna go into my selection mode. And and it's not letting me edge loop. Cool. Well, it's not letting me edge loop right now. And that might be because I have already established a subdivision modifier to it, and I've actually extruded from here. Okay, so I'm actually not going to fix this right now, just due to the time. I'm going to keep everything red, and I want to get right into the procedural textures because I think this would be pretty fun. So procedural textures are a way of being able to use nodes to kind of color and texturize your object. Now, I'm going to hide my object by pressing H, okay? And then I'm going to do add Shift A to add, and I'm just going to add a plane. And this will just give you kind of almost like a panel where you can see what is happening a little bit more clearly than trying to look at it on a three-dimensional surface. So if I go to new, I'm going to add a new material to this. Okay, and this will be called procedural texture, whatever you want to call it. And what's cool about this is you can then still control the color and the material, but you can also add some different nodes. Now, what's hidden under here are a bunch of nodes. So if I press Control Shift A, I have all of these options of different ways to handle my my textures. For today, I'm just going into texture, and I'm going to choose the noise texture. Okay, the noise texture is just going to essentially add a noisy texture similar to that of what you see on like a screen or something onto the face. So if I take the color input and put it into the base color, you're gonna see something like this. And what that's showing is the noise texture on the flat plane. And you have all of these different options that you can change, like the scale and all of that, and the distortion, and make some really interesting um, styles here. So this I wanted to show you guys because I think this could be, very interesting in terms of creativity and whatnot. So if I go ahead and I'm going to add one more thing, and it's going to be called a color ramp. So I can even search for it, and I find this color ramp. Color ramp is one of probably the most frequent nodes I use. It is very popular. It allows you to do some really cool things. And so this is one example of putting the noise texture into the color ramp, and then that will establish your base color. And so I can use these bars to kind of change the brightness and the contrast of my texture that's being displayed. Okay. And so I have the scale here. I can still change this, and I'm not using an image for this. So it's saving memory on my computer. I don't need to install or download a 4K image resolution, because this is like resolution proof, if you will. This is like unlimited resolution as far as I'm concerned. So when you're working with an image, you're kind of stuck with that. With this, it's dynamic. You can use math nodes to really expand on this. And this is black and white, but if I'm going into my color ramp, I can click one of these and change the color to, let's say, like blue. And then this one, I can change to, I don't know, like kind of a purplish tint. That's fine. And so I can do some cool things with this, where now I have almost like a cool pattern that I can apply to other objects, because now I have like a material for it. And so if I then do like metallic, I can add a metal to it, decrease the roughness, and now we're getting into more like glassy. Right? So this could be cool for, some windows or whatever. It's totally up to you. Now, I think this is a cool point to maybe jump into like the render tab, because right now we're in the materials, but we don't see this on what our render would look like. So if we actually do choose render, it's very, very dark. And that's because we don't have any lighting. When we first started the tutorial, we pressed A and we deleted everything. So we're gonna add a quick light. And so if I do Shift A and then add a light, you can choose whichever one. I'm just gonna do, point lights work, area lights work. And area light is just pretty much a light that's coming from a plane, sorry. And so here, if you click the object, you actually have options of being able to increase the power, which I will do. You can change the color and all this stuff. So we will probably get to kind of like rendering, lighting. That could definitely be another tutorial, but I just wanted to show you a little bit about this. So now we have this. We have a little bit of some procedural textures. You can always use different textures. There's actually, if you just look into the texture layout, experiment with these guys. If you guys are interested, we have moose grave, we have point density, sky texture, wave texture. So we have all of these ones, and you can combine them, you can mix them, you can add math nodes to multiply them or subtract them. So definitely experiment with this, get creative. This is a super basic introduction, but this is just the panel in which you would do all of that. And then you will be able to apply this on your object. So I am going to go back to my cup, which as you can see, I didn't rename it, shame on me. So I will type in cup. Now, I didn't UV unwrap this, so here's my area. So I can go ahead and hide this by pressing H, or I can go here and just press this little I button, and that will bring it back up. So I didn't UV unwrap this, but maybe, just maybe it will still work. So if I go to blue matte, right, that will turn blue, red matte, and now let's try our procedural texture. That doesn't look that bad. So now I have a procedural texture, a little bit glossy on my cup. And so if I go to my render view, how does that look? Let's turn on the light. Let's bring the light up. Okay, so we're getting there. We're getting there. It's pretty, it's getting there. So what we can do, and what I usually like to do if I'm showcasing or creating a model is, we have our 3D cursor right in the middle. If I press Shift A, I like to add a plane. This is as if it's sitting on, let's say, a table. And once that plane is involved there, I have here, I'm gonna name this floor. And this I can delete this. It's just a plane with the texture. So now I have a floor here. And this is gonna be my stage. Okay, so now that we have the materials, we can still change this. We can change the scale even when it's on the model, change the detail. So there's so much we can do and really make this look pretty. Can even change the color here. Can bring this forward. So again, I mean, this is where your creativity will spark. All right, so I'm done playing around with this. I like it. It's fun. It's cute. So what I'm now gonna do is really quickly, in the next 15, 20 minutes, is show you some simulations. Let's just try to pour some water in the cup. I think that's a good start. So we have this. I'm going to hide the floor because I don't need that. I'm going to go into my object mode, and my solid mode, excuse me. And then I'm going to hide the light, and now I just have my cup. This is perfect, okay? For simulations, the first thing you must do, I'm also gonna hide this, guys, sorry. The first thing you must do is add a domain. Now, a domain is essentially a bounding box that serves as the boundary of the simulation. All the fluid objects must remain in the domain. That's important. So if you don't have a domain, your fluid is not going to work. Fluid objects outside of the domain will not bake, and you won't see anything. So as long as the fluid or any of the simulations is within the bounding box, you should be able to see it. So with that being said, how do I add a domain? I'm just going to press Shift A, and I'm going to add a cube. Okay, and so for this, I'm going to go into wireframe. Another hotkey for you, I could more than happy than go up here and go to wireframe, but I'm actually going to press Z and then wireframe. And I'm going to scale this up and bring this up. Okay, and I'm going into my X-ray mode so I can see where I lie and where my cup lies. It doesn't need to be in the middle, but make sure it's big enough for your fluid simulation. And now we have the domain. So let's establish that it's a domain. Let's tell the system, this is my box. It's not a cube. It is a domain. So I'm going to click my domain. I'm going to go into my physics properties, and we're going to be doing a fluid. So I'm going to click fluid and I'm going to type domain. Choose the type domain. Okay, we will get to some of these options in a second, but the domain type, we're not doing gas, we're doing liquid. But keep in mind, we can do liquid, we can do gas, we can do fire, we can do particles. Today, we're just going to be doing liquid, but room to learn more. Great, so now I have my domain. We don't have anything yet. There's nothing shooting out the domain or shooting out the water. So typically for just real world objects, you know, like a hose would be cool. You know, just a way for the fluid to be distributed. And so I'm going to add a cylinder because it kind of looks like a hose. And I'm going to scale it down and bring it right up here. And I'm going to scale it in the Y direction. And it looks pretty good. You know, it might not be centered, but that's okay. I'm just going to go here, kind of angle it as if it's going to go into the cup. I mean, that's the end goal here. And so I think this is a good size. You can always change this later, but I have the domain. This needs to be within the domain. And then you're going to hit fluid, type, and I'm going to do flow. And then the flow is not going to be smoke, fire, but it's going to be liquid. And the flow behavior, if I just do geometry, it's just going to take that geometry of the cylinder that I added and just almost use that as the container of the liquid. But I want the liquid to continuously flow throughout the frames. So I'm going to do inflow because that inflow is just, it's flowing inside the domain. Hopefully that makes sense. And I think that's good for now. So I'm going to go ahead and click my domain. I'm going to name this cylinder inflow. And I'm going to click my domain. And now I have all of these options here. Now, this is where you have two different options. Your resolution division, I would keep this low to start, especially if you're unsure where your hardware limitations are. So I am going to just do 30 for now. And I have my domain selected. And then here you have type, you have replay or modular. These are different options that you can do depending on the simulation you are trying to guide. And so if I do 35, yeah, maybe something over 30 would be better. So I did 35, and you can kind of see just a few particles here. And now this is a really low resolution, so we're not going to have too many particles. But if I go to my time series here and press enter, I just want to see what it does. And great, so we're having some fluid, and the particles are flowing within our domain, limited to the domain, and it repeats at 250. So this is good. This is the replay type. If you do modular, you will need to press a bake button. So if I do modular, I'll have to press this bake button, and that will bake all of the data. And it should just play at the end. So once it's baked, you then have access to this. And so you can go here and you're free to kind of flourish within the timeline until you press free data. Just the way I work, I sometimes do replay because then I have a strong enough computer to just, you know, be reset and stuff like that. But okay, so we're getting closer to getting this into the cup. And so right now, there's nothing. Well, we have something, but we don't really have anything that looks like a meshed liquid. So let's do that. I want to bring this into the cup. So we have particles to work with. So I'm happy with that. So if I click here, I have this initial velocity. So now I can change the velocity of the liquid. Yeah, so if I click this, here I have the options of like which direction to go. And so I see this y-axis, I'm on the x looking forward. So let's try y just to experiment. And let's do like 3. So that's 3 meters per second. And so I'm going to hit the domain. And with replay, you are going to need to change the resolution division. Now, the reason why I do replay is because every kind of change I make, I always kind of go up one resolution division or a few incrementally. And that will kind of give you, so if I do like 50, for example, I have a lot more particles that I'm working with. But if I do 40, it's not 400. Oh, no, I did. I clicked it. Anyways, so I'll just kind of explain while my computer is loading. That's why you don't do that. So I'm going to be working with 35, and we have an initial velocity that's going in 3 meters per second in the y direction. So let's just check that out. Okay, so that's good to know. It's good to test it. And so now we're going in the opposite direction. So I can either flip this around, or I can go in the -3 direction. It's entirely up to you. So I'm gonna do that, and then just remember you might need to change this to like 36, or I believe if you just press enter, it will update. So now if we go, great, I'm pretty close. I'm kind of at the edge of the cup, that's okay. I can either move the cup, move the flow, increase the velocity. There's so much you can do just by customizing it. So for now, I'm just gonna move this forward. Just go here, and let's try that. Let's bring this up to 40 because I'm starting to feel a little bit more confident. Great, perfect. All right, so now I have a flow, but it's not interacting with the cup. And that's because we need to add a collision to the cup. So we need to tell the simulation that there is something in the way of the particles. And so if I go to fluid and then go to effector and then collision, I should be in good shape. Just keep in mind, treat this object as a planar enclosed mesh. Sometimes I will toggle this on and off to test it. Sometimes it does work better than others. So let's try it without it first. So if I go ahead and press, I might need to reset it. So I'm going to go up just a little bit more because I'm getting more confident. And yeah, so it's kind of going in, kind of going out. So I've found out that like if you use is planar, sometimes it's a little bit better. So hopefully this is better. Nice. All right, so we are filling the cup, which is pretty much what we wanted. Now there is some separation here. So if I go, now if I do go into viewport shading, some of you may have already done this, you're gonna be completely blocked off. You're not gonna be able to see anything. You can do X-ray, but it's still kind of a nuisance. There's two things you can do. You can always keep this box as a viewport and always look at it as a wireframe by coming down here and doing viewport. But what, for the sake of time, I'm just going to use this domain, okay, and solidify these particles. So I'm going to make these particles a meshed liquid instead of just these fluid particles. And it's going to take the domain and replace the domain with that meshed liquid form, okay? And the way to do that is if you click the domain, you see this mesh here. Use mesh, enable fluid mesh using amplification. So let's click that. And there's so many options, guys, that I strongly advise you to experiment with these when we're done. It's hard to include all of these in a 2-hour session, but just experiment. I just wanted to show you where things are located so that you have more confidence in doing this yourself. So now, if we press play, we are filling up a cup with a resolution division of 40 on our liquid. Now, if I go here, I'm seeing it fill up. Now, we are experiencing some, like a gap here. There's different ways you can get rid of that. You know, it is probably using a collision, and is planar is probably affecting that. There are probably some options here that are adding a thickness here to it. So for the sake of time, we're just going to flow this in, but just know that, you know, that's customizable here. So for the sake of time, let's just fill the cup. And now we have this. So what I'm probably going to want to do is just increase the fluid. And just remember, if you want to click your domain now, you're going to have to click the liquid inside. Your domain is no longer the box. And so I'm going to go here, and I'm just going to increase this to like 60, increase my resolution, and then I'm just going to affect it forward. It might take a little bit more time on your computer, but that's because you're increasing the resolution of your liquid. Okay, so now it's like filled to the brim, so I can right click and smooth shade, and now we're getting there. So now if we go to render mode, we kind of have, and I turn on the light, we kind of have a cup being filled up. Let me add the floor to it too. So this is pretty cool. I will just add a color now to it. So as we did before, you can click on the liquid itself, add new, and then add a liquid. So I was going to be doing coffee. So I'm going to do like a brownish, and that's like chocolate milk, but that's totally fine. I'm okay with chocolate milk. So, you know, you can always adjust this. Now, with more time, I would explain how to turn this more transparent. It depends on what render engine you're using. So if I go back to my 3D viewer, or sorry, shader editor. Right now I'm in Eevee, but if I was in Cycles, which is a little bit more, it uses ray tracing rather than rasterization. And again, I will definitely include a link that explains the two throughout a video that might be helpful for you guys to understand the difference between the two game engines, or sorry, the render engines. Because some things that you do for materials and shadows will be different depending on which render engine you are using. And so for this one, because I'm in Cycles, and it's using ray tracing, I'm actually just going to change this principled BSDF, and I'm just going to delete it. And I'm just going to Shift A, search, and I'm going to do a glass. And if I do that and put it into the surface, I now have like a water. So for all my hydro homies out there, this is great. So now I have a water. You can change the index of refraction to match a little bit more of like what water looks like, or if you're adding this like viscous material, you can change the viscosity of both the material and the simulation. There's options of being able to change like the thickness of the material as well. So that's great. Now, we are about 15 minutes out. And so hopefully you guys got some good foundations and understanding of these three components of modeling something, adding a texture to it, and then a fun little simulation. And I would really stress trying to do the simulation again and again with different variations and different objects in the way, and then possibly you know, adding like a fire, or because you still need the domain and you need the inflow, but those are pretty much the bases, and then you can expand on that. So instead of liquid, you just choose gas or fire, and then going through the time series, replaying or baking, it's the same idea. So that being said, And now that we have 15 minutes left, I just want to be able to now add a camera so you guys can then actually render your image and show this to your friends and family. So I'm going to stay in cycles just because I added this flow here. Or you know what, I'm actually going to go to Eevee and I'm going to get rid of this. Now, if you did want to do refraction in Eevee, there's a few things you'll need to do, and most of you might be working in Eevee, so I think it's worth doing real quick. You just need to do the following. So I'm going to bring back my principled BSDF and include that into the surface, okay? Then I go to render, and I have this screen space reflections. You want to make sure that this is turned on, and then you have refraction turned on. Okay. Then you go to your materials, and where it says transmission, you want to add this to 1. And then where it says roughness, you want to bring that down to probably whatever you're interested in. So we're getting closer. Let me add another like light source so you can see. And you know what, I can actually just go here. So this is my material mode. So we're getting closer, but there's still one last thing you need to do. So if you click this, and then you go into the materials tab, you just want to make sure that your blend mode is opaque and that the screen space refraction is turned on. Once you do that, you then just need to edit your refraction depth and your roughness. And then when we go into render mode, we have more or less like a liquidy see-through. And this will work for glass, or, you know, glass, windows, liquid, all that stuff. So this is how you would do it in Eevee. In cycles, you just add like a glass. You can change the color there, but so change it to like a little bit of a lighter blue. So yeah, all right. So with that being said, hopefully that was clear and not too fast. I am now just going to add a camera and snap a photo of this beautiful mug. So a little tip of the trade is I take my plane and I press tab, and then I take these 2 edges here. This is just kind of like a studio thing. And as I grab these, I extrude this up in the Z direction. And then I take these 2, and this is the last hotkey I'll show, or one of the last hotkeys today, is Control B for bevel. And then I increase that, and then I roll with my wheel. And then this will kind of smooth out that edge. So now if I click it and do smooth, now I have like a smooth background. It does some nice shadows, and you can change the color of your background and stuff. But let's add a camera. So if I do Control A, just like I was adding any other object, I can add a camera. Okay, now my camera is somewhere here. It's right here. Okay, and now what I usually do is I open up a separate plane. I can keep this into render mode, or you can do material mode, whichever one. And if you press 0, you can see what your camera sees. But because our camera is so far low, you only see this gray screen. So I can carry my camera up, and I can paint it over. So now I have like a cool, you know, it's pretty bright. So let me turn this down. Oh, because I'm in material mode. All right, so now if I do this, now I have a little bit of a better view. A cool trick, it's probably one of the longest hotkeys I know, is Control, Alt, and 0. Depending on where you're looking, if you do Control, Alt, 0, it's going to place the camera at your view. Super helpful trick. Yeah, so we have this here. We have a little bit of lighting. We'll talk about lighting maybe in another course, but I will just add a little bit of a backdrop here, something, and you can see the shininess. I mean, some people like that. You can see the details and all that. So we have this in place. The last thing you would probably want to do is go to your sampling, and you can add some like bloom effects, because that can be shiny and it can bloom, and you can change the threshold there to make it really bloom. So get creative here, and then when you're finally done, you can go into this output properties and change your resolution. If you wanted a higher res image, that's great. If this is all dependent on what you need it for. And then when you're ready to go, you can just go up here to render, and then render image or the satisfying F12. So I don't know if you guys can see my render results, but once you have the F12, you'll have a rendered image. And so congratulations, everybody. You just made a beautiful cup with an awesome procedural texture with simulated fluid flowing inside of it, adding some liquid materials and some lighting, and added a camera. So now I know that was quite a bit for the first course, kind of the introduction. We went through kind of 3 heavy principles of 3D modeling, but that was what I wanted to show you today. I think I'll leave the remaining time for questions. I will share this slideshow with you guys. This is just a quick recap of what we did and some of the terminologies that we used, as well as some possible future Blender workshops that we could potentially have in the future, depending on your interest level. And if you guys are very interested in this, rigging, animation, motion capture, geometry nodes, particles and wind. So definitely let me know, shoot me an email or leave in chat what you guys are interested in. And we will try to cater to all of you guys. So even the Blender analysis and Python scripting, let me know. We're more than happy to do that. So with that said, questions. Do you follow Blender Guru? Definitely suggest following Blender Guru. He is a world star at Blender, and is definitely part of like Texture Haven or Polygon or one of those. And he does a lot of tutorials online. His famous one is the donut. I can only select vertices, not faces. You do have that option. There's the 3 tiles. So just, make sure you're confirming which one you're on. What edge loops are due. So edge loops essentially add a edge around your mesh. This could be kind of an even distribution if you have some curvature or you're dealing with a pipe. Edge loops can help with creating kind of a smooth blend of that piping. So you're just adding geometry evenly, and you can distribute that amongst kind of the whole between the 2 edges. So you can add like 4 or 5 or however many, depending on the resolution that you're adding. You're essentially just adding more to the geometry. Great. How do we extend it to make the handle? Hopefully the extrusion. So yeah, I think that was essentially it. Just wanted to say thank you all for joining. This was brought to you by the Immersion Lab, so feel free to check us out. We are in the middle of campus. We are a lab that kind of connects scientists, engineers, artists. It doesn't need to be research-based, and we focus a lot on creating digital assets and adding kind of virtual reality experiences for research. So if you're interested in the space, reach out. We have, motion tracking, VR, AR. So if you're a game developer and you want it for, develop more in the scientific community or research-based things, definitely let us know. We also do, physiology recordings, 3D scanning, media and 360 content creation. So let us know if you're interested. So I think that is about it. If you guys have any lingering questions, feel free to email me. It's just rex@mit.edu, or you can swing by the lab. We are more than happy to join. And a Unity workshop, absolutely. We have done one in the past of creating a virtual avatar of yourself, and then we add that to Unity, and we add a material to it. So stay tuned. If it sounds like a lot of people are interested in this space, so we are very interested in kind of expanding our workshops and our training modules to fit the needs of the users. So definitely keep me posted. Shoot me an email specifically. But yes, a lot to do this year. All right, everybody. Well, with that being said, hopefully you guys will receive a follow-up email shortly with some resources that might help you and guide you forward in your 3D development journey. Thank you again, and we will look forward to having you guys in future workshops. So take care.